He joins us now, the great Jim Avila from ABC News. He was the senior correspondent there, and you can still catch him occasionally on 2020, a White House correspondent for years as well. Jim, great to have you in. Thank you so much.
Morning, Mark.
I wonder, we're waiting now on these counts from outlying districts in Nevada, also in Arizona on key races. The Arizona Senate race appears over, though. Mark Kelly looks to be taking that, I believe.
Yeah, I don't think it's been called yet, but the numbers look really good there, and the remaining numbers appear to be in the Phoenix area, the Tucson area. The caveat on that, and it's really not so much in the Kelly race, but in the Kari Lake race, is that the last election, so these are mail-in votes that they're called the late earlies because they were dropped off late, either at drop boxes or mailed in late. And those tended to skew a bit Republican last time. So that is a problem with the Kari Lake race for governor. But Kelly has such a large lead that it's doubtful that will be overcome. And Nevada looks pretty good. Closing. Every time they release something, the Democrat there in the Senate race is, in fact, catching up to Laxalt. And there's enough votes there that most people are saying that the trend is looking good for that. What's important about all that, of course, Mark, is that if Democrats win those two, Georgia's gravy. So even though Warnock probably is favored in Georgia, that really just means 51, and you don't need Kamala Harris to cast the winning vote every time. And it also gives you a little breathing room when you talk about Joe Manchin. So right now, things look pretty good in the Democratic side.
I'm wondering if we can go to the GOP for a moment, because there's a festival of they are essentially eating Donald Trump for breakfast now. Yeah, I mean, they're just Donald Trump is on the lunch menu, and they are eating him. Rupert Murdoch, I think it's not in any small measure big news. I mean, it's big news that Rupert Murdoch has turned on him with his publications. I'm talking about the Wall Street Journal, the Daily News, or the Post, and also, this is perhaps more important, Fox News Channel, which is where so many of these voters who are in this conservative feedback loop are getting their news. And Michael Shure joins us. I should just mention, wasn't sure. Yeah, hey, Michael Shure, nice to have him in the.
Thank you.
In the mix.
Thanks to the fans, as always.
Yes. So we just were turning. We kind of were checking off on races, and now I was just going to ask about what's happening in the GOP. They're, in a way, I was saying they're feasting on Trump, but they're reorganizing, I guess, is what I'm getting. And the turning of the Murdoch communications monster on Trump and toward DeSantis, that's no small deal.
It's no small deal. It's also too early, really, to, I think, gauge what the full effect is going to be. We're going to see a runoff in Georgia over the next 4 weeks. It's going to see sort of the disposition of the party. And then I think you're going to also see what happens in the way that Kevin McCarthy tries to wrangle, if he's the going to be standing for speaker and they're in the majority, how he's going to wrangle his party. It's going to be really tough to lead that party now. And I think that what you're going to see is the Republicans trying to figure out how to reckon. Trump helped in some places, MAGA helped, but in the big picture nationally, it took a real drubbing the other day. And I think they're going to have to sort of sift through how to deal with that and how to appeal some of the people who got there because of Trump, but most of them didn't in spite of him.
Jim?
It was refreshing, though, to hear Laura Ingraham on Fox News turn on Trump. I just sat there and let it flow over me as she said that the Republican voters are tired of being run by ego and want people to turn to their issues and not be so concerned about themselves. Clearly speaking about Donald Trump, and even I haven't heard Hannity yet turn on him, so I don't know yet. But across the board, they are. Ron DeSantis is their new hero, and I think that's going to be the case for a while. But if Trump wins, announces and wins the primaries, Fox will turn all around. and they're not going to turn back a Democrat. Suddenly Trump will be a hero again. So it is short-lived, but enjoy it while you can.
When you say if Trump wins, you mean, I understand if he were to actually, there's a lot of real estate between now and him winning anything. I don't know what you mean by that.
Primaries, I'm talking
the
about.
Primaries. Okay, yeah. But I mean, I think the other delicious thing, and I've heard this from listeners. I'm sorry to use the word delicious, but it just seems like it may be appropriate to watch DeSantis and Trump go at each other, and then there might be even a Mike Pence dash in there as well. It will be a little more of a bloodbath than it was the last time.
Yeah, it will be. And I think that the problem DeSantis has is that the bar is very high. He is bound to underwhelm. He is not this dynamic Trump-like figure that a lot of the Republicans have become accustomed to responding to. And while he has been popular in Florida, he barely won his first race. He won handily against sort of a retread, and I think the Democrats regret the candidate they had there in the same way that Republicans regret some of the Senate candidates they put up. But I think that, we must say that Florida is a red state right now, but Ron DeSantis has not been tested on the national scene, and none of them are until they try it. But he has a big I think, expectations to fulfill, and it's going to be tough. So he may underwhelm when it comes time to do that. We don't know.
He's certainly a lower profile, less noisy candidate. To me, he's he's just another brand of that authoritarian Trump, but just in a slightly more palatable form, in the sense that he's not as noisy, Michael. But you make a really interesting point, which is the noise is actually the thing that gets the GOP attention. The base wants the noise. I saw DeSantis is more dangerous, frankly, because he's not as noisy. But you see it as something that might work against him in a primary.
I wouldn't say it's just due to the noise. I would just sort of say that he's somebody that they know the name, and they know that he what he did in COVID, and he know that he was simpatico to a lot of the feelings that conservatives had during the pandemic. But now that he's going to be rolled out as, I wouldn't say it's early to say an heir apparent. Trump still has a hold on the party. But I think that as this sours and he's the first thing to pop up, I think that people are going to have to take a look at him. And they might have built up a superhero that shows up as just a guy. And they're going to have to reckon with that somehow.
And I'm not sure how his social issue stuff really plays in the rest of the country. The gay community, the transgender community, he is enemy number one. He is constantly using this. His big phrase is he's against the woke culture. And while that plays in Florida, I'm not sure that's going to play that well in the Midwest and in some of the other places across the country.
Though it is consistent, Jim. I would say, Jim, that it's consistent with the Republican Party right now. It goes along with the way they're thinking and what they're voting for, which is why he probably appeals in Florida to a degree. It's just
and he'll do okay in the primaries, but again, he's not a candidate who's going to appeal to independents.
Right.
And that's the problem with the Republican Party right now. Is they're too inside baseball. That's the problem with Trump. He's got his 35%, and they can't expand, and that's what they saw in this last election. Is they can't expand. It wasn't just. I give women a tremendous amount of credit, and young people, but it wasn't just them. It was independents who rejected the anti-democracy platforms of the Republican Party and the election deniers. In most cases, there are some that did win, but Mastriano in Pennsylvania ruined the Republican chances up and down the ticket. Pennsylvania went almost completely blue because of that, and that is really a problem for them. And Mark, it's your show, and I don't want to take it over, but I do want to talk a little bit about, if we can. I'm interested in Michael's take and your take on the media, and have they apologized enough, about what they did? I read Nate Cohen's quote unquote explanation / maybe apology in the New York Times, and he is still wrong He is claiming that the Republicans, that they were right in every place except where democracy and abortion was on the ballot, that the polls were right. Okay, well, so what? If the democracy and abortion were on the ballot all over the country, and that's in fact what messed up the Republicans. And to give the kind of weak explanation about why the polls were so wrong, I'm a big fan of the New York Times, but that is embarrassing, and they really should. They could. We're lucky in that it caused, actually, I think, a Democratic turnout. They were worried, but it could have actually discouraged voters, and that was dangerous.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm giving them a little bit of benefit of time. It just happened on Tuesday, and it takes a little while to figure these things out. Generally, I mean, you've covered so many news stories, breaking news stories, Jim, that that what you learn on hour one is different than week two in terms of how you learn about things and how people respond to them and what is sort of gleaned. I think that everybody was kind of shocked, and I think the people that do the polls and the people who cover those polls have to figure out how to respond to what happened. And it doesn't happen in a couple of days. But there's no question that polling is flawed. The way the media covers polls and relies upon those polls and what those do to the body politic completely, it's skewed, and this election proved that. That in big ways. We're going to have to look at the way we poll America. Mark, you and I have talked about this before, and polling is something that has not figured out completely how to get by new technology and new habits. The way we work in different ways now, literally work.
And the reporters have to stop in Washington, and you've been in this as I have, Michael, in D.C., covering politics. They got to stop talking to each other, stop reading each other's articles, and repeating what everybody else is saying. It does take some cojones to stand up and say, wait a minute. The only one that I know that was really saying it out loud was Matthew Dowd, who was a commentator on MSNBC and a friend of mine from the ABC days. And he was saying strongly, wait a minute, women and young people are going to come out, and this is not going to be a red wave.
On the chat line, Katie Lynch says, to me, the red wave predictions took on the tenor of a Karl Rove talking point. Say it often enough, and it will be. I wonder if the GOP will back away from that ploy.
No.
Yeah, it will. I don't think they will, because it still works. I think we're going to look at this as the abortion election, and I think that it was impenetrable, and that was the one thing that people didn't predict. We talked about some of these poll numbers out of Pennsylvania. CBS, CNN both did polls that showed abortion was 36 or 38% of the vote, down to another 9 or 10 points down to inflation, which everybody thought was going to play a bigger role. Crime, 10 or 11% of voters, only 10 or 11% of voters said that was the number one issue for them in Pennsylvania. So there you have it. The Republicans thought this was, and the media followed, thought this was an election on crime. In some places it was. I would argue New York State is one of those. But in the big picture, this was the abortion election. And that's kind of, that could be dangerous for Republicans to dismiss it as that, and it wouldn't happen next time. Just as dangerous for Democrats to think that this is going to be a trend because this was a one-issue election.
And what the Republicans do too, Mark, if I just make one point here, is that they send around these junk polls that are not, they're not really well vetted, and they're not, they lean in their way, and reporters read those, and it gets in their heads, and it's just, they do a good job of that. In 538, which is now owned by ABC, they aggregate, and they're aggregating some of those polls that go into the mix, and they shouldn't. We really need to screen what polls are being used, because some of these outlying polls, the outlier polls that give the Republicans such a big advantage and weight the Republican vote, the MAGA vote, so heavily, they're doing a real disservice to the country.
And one more thing to point out: if these polls are so bad, part of the reason that the media and the pollsters and the voters thought that this was going to go a different way was because you had an unpopular president at a first midterm, which, generally speaking, moves you to think it's going to go a certain way. Well, the president may not be so unpopular. If all of these polls are so inaccurate, so too is the poll that says he's at 40 or 41%. I would imagine he's closer to, the high 40s to 50 than what we believe because of these polls. So everything that we rely upon sort of backfired.
That's such a key point. And frankly, it's a point, as I recall, that you have made, that we talk about polls a lot. Michael's right. In the run up to this, we've really done a lot of focusing on the polls and the accuracy of them. And the point you were making about approval rating is one that you've made repeatedly, which is the days of the approval rating being over 50% are pretty well done. I mean, just given the factionalized nature of politics in America. And Michael, you made the point that we have to start getting used to these lower approval ratings. And then I think you're both kind of making the point that the approval rating per se may actually need a big question mark over it just based on the flaws in the polling process. I mean,
I'm not sure that that Biden was a huge factor in this election, period. I don't think that people went to I think Trump was a much bigger factor in this election than Joe Biden was. Maybe that was the case even in 2000 when people came out to vote against Donald Trump, not for Joe Biden. And I think in this case, they ignored inflation a little bit. It wasn't as big as important. And they ignored Joe Biden's popularity or unpopularity. He is what he's done. If you ask about what he has done in individual programs, the infrastructure bill, those things poll very well. Abortion polls very well. And pro-choice polls very well. But when you personify it and you put it as Joe Biden, it doesn't poll as well. And it's just because he's not a great communicator, in my opinion. Although he did pretty well at the press conference yesterday. But in general, his platforms, the Democratic policies are much more popular. Well, I don't even know what the Republican policies are most of the time. But whatever policy that they have, and mostly it's culture wars, not that popular.
Can I ask a question about Herschel Walker? Because I was just reading a story that Republicans from across the country are converging on Georgia. They had last night Senator Ted Cruz to rally the GOP base in Georgia.
That'll do it.
And so really,
they're looking
at
your social media.
Yeah.
It's going to come down to this race to control the Senate. I know it was already kind of a race with a national spotlight on it. How ugly is this one going to get, you guys?
Well, first of all, it may not be a race to control the Senate. It may be a race to extend control of the Senate if
we were saying that earlier.
And Kelly win. I was in Georgia for the last runoff. It was a runoff that decided the Senate because Herschel Walker. It was at that time Kelly Loeffler and Raphael Warnock, and the same people were there. It was Tim Scott. It was Rand Paul. It was Mike Lee. It was Ted Cruz at rallies all around the Atlanta Metroplex, and they were there saying, the exact same things. This is for control of the Senate. It was. They were, trying to get people to support Loeffler, and I think it's going to happen this time. One thing, and this points to what Jim was saying about an anti-Trump thing. There's an anti-Stacey Abrams feeling among Republicans in Georgia who have grown tired of her, who didn't mind Brian Kemp opening the state as he did. It's why he ran so far ahead of Herschel Walker. He's the Republican governor there. He distanced himself a bit from Trump. He certified the election, all of that. And I think that a lot of those Republicans who came out to vote against Stacey Abrams, they're not going to be there in a couple of weeks. And if it's for control of the Senate, more people may show up. But if it's not, then it's going to be an easier walk, I think, for Herschel Walker. I mean, that's just basic analysis. Is that, like, if you know Georgians, that it's tough to get people out 4 weeks later to vote again, and especially young voters. So it's a challenge generally to Democrats, and Stacey Abrams got them out a few years ago. But this time, it may be the fact that Stacey Abrams isn't on the ballot that gets them out.
This is the point that you were making, Jim.
Is anybody really motivated by Herschel Walker? I don't think Herschel Walker standing alone is going to motivate people to come out and vote. And I think that Brian Kemp was the reason why Herschel Walker got as close as he did. A lot of Republicans were in the booth to vote for him, as Michael says. And now on his own, and plus there's no libertarian candidate to kind of muddy the waters. Even if that, especially if the Democrats win in Nevada and Arizona, which they look on track to do, I don't think that they're going to flood the polls. Republicans are going to flood the polls. There'll be more motivation for them if it's a Senate-defining election, which it doesn't look to be like it's going to be.
I think what Jim's saying is that people came out to vote in the election either for Kemp or against Abrams. They're in the booth and they're like, all right, I might as well vote for Herschel Walker because he's the Republican. But they're not in the booth to begin with. They're not going to be there to vote for him.
Exactly. Right.
They're looking at just social media.
So the deal is that you guys have both given us a great conversation around this. And as to results, you pointed to the Senate race maybe being decided in Arizona. And we're waiting on Nevada. It's close in Arizona, I understand, but there is a lead that's being put out by Mark Kelly that looks like it may be, I don't want to say insurmountable, but certainly a pretty healthy one, right?
It would be shocking if Kelly didn't win at this point. It would be very shocking. He's far ahead.
I'd love next week, as we will have more results then, to talk about the future of those who animated the Trump administration. Steve Bannon, Miller, Stephen Miller's being talked about in the chat room now. Those who really defined policy at the border. Some of the same dispositions toward issues are shared by somebody like DeSantis. Again, I know it's very early in the baking of this cake, but people are already running for the presidency, and it's not too early to maybe talk about that conversation once we have more results as to what Congress is going to look like. I thank you guys so much for making time. I know it's not always easy, but Michael Shure, you can find him on Twitter, SHURE. Niners, the Niners, what's the deal, Michael? Do you have a thought about the Niners?
I'm feeling good. We're playing the Chargers this weekend. We have everybody coming back from injury, and we have Christian McCaffrey, and he's the runoff.
Okay. Okay. And Jim Avila, former senior ABC correspondent, White House correspondent, always the coolest. We love that you're a regular now, and appreciate both you guys being here. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good stuff.